The day I watched 30,000 gallons of creek water crash through my HOA president's basement ceiling, I knew karma had just delivered the most expensive lesson of her life. There I stood in Delilah Thornberry's flooded man cave, watching her husband's $80,000 home theater disappear under rushing mountain water while she shrieked about insurance claims and federal lawsuits. The metallic taste of pure justice mixed with the smell of soggy drywall as water thundered through her designer ceiling like nature's own personal vendetta, my boots squelching on her ruined Italian leather furniture. 6 months earlier, this power-drunk HOA Karen had tried to fill my family's 80-year-old creek with concrete, not realizing she was picking a fight with a hydraulic engineer who knew exactly how water finds a way through even the most expensive basement waterproofing. What would you do if your HOA president illegally tried to destroy your family's heritage with concrete trucks? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe to HOA Stories for more neighborhood justice that'll make your day. My name is Marcus Hartwell, and 6 months ago I thought inheriting my grandfather's 3-acre slice of Colorado paradise would heal the wounds left by my messy divorce. The crystal-clear creek running through our backyard had been my childhood sanctuary during summer visits, where Grandpa Joe taught me to catch trout with my bare hands and identify every bird by its call. That creek had flowed strong for 80 years, fed by mountain runoff that never failed even during drought seasons, creating a thriving ecosystem where my kids weekend catching salamanders, building stone dams, and reconnecting with their old man after the custody battles. More than just beautiful, that creek was legally bulletproof. My grandfather's 1952 water rights made our claim senior to anything built afterward. From my 15 years designing hydraulic systems for Morrison Environmental, I knew water law inside and out. First in use, first in right. And junior users can never force senior rights holders to surrender access. The creek wasn't just our family's heartbeat, it was the reason property values stayed high, why wildlife thrived here, and what kept our summer cooling costs reasonable while neighbors ran their air conditioners into bankruptcy. Then Delilah Thornberry slithered into our lives like a designer-dressed plague. Picture a woman who relocated from Phoenix with enough new money to buy the biggest McMansion in Millfield Springs, and enough entitlement to think that made her neighborhood empress. Her husband Vernon owns 3 car dealerships, the kind of guy who puts "Winner 1" vanity plates on his white Escalade and parks it in their circular driveway, like a monument to compensating for something. Within 6 months of arriving, Delilah had maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency and launched what can only be described as a suburban ethnic cleansing campaign disguised as community improvement. The woman had supernatural talent for identifying anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of perfection, then systematically grinding them down with fees, violations, and endless harassment until they either conformed, paid up, or fled in defeat. Her expensive perfume couldn't mask the stench of petty tyranny that followed her around our once peaceful neighborhood like a toxic cloud. The war officially began with a certified letter that made my blood pressure spike just reading it. Delilah demanded I remediate the water hazard within 30 days or face $500 daily fines, claiming my family creek created mosquito breeding grounds and posed property damage risks to neighboring homes. The irony was rich. This woman who'd never seen a natural water source that wasn't chlorinated and heated was lecturing a hydraulic engineer about water management. When I knocked on her door with Grandpa Joe's water rights documentation and offered reasonable compromises like decorative fencing, mosquito control treatments, or professional landscaping to make it prettier, she wouldn't even pretend to look at the papers. Precedent cannot be set for special treatment, she declared, standing in my driveway wearing $1,000 heels that crunched on our gravel like she was grinding my ancestors' legacy into dust. Her reign of terror had already claimed multiple victims, and I'd watched the pattern emerge with growing disgust. Sweet misses. Morgan, a Vietnamese grandmother whose immaculate vegetable garden fed half the neighborhood kids, was bullied into ripping out her plants because they were allegedly non-native species, despite being the same tomatoes sold at every grocery store in Colorado. Dale, a young father juggling his wife's cancer treatments and 2 small kids, got harassed into repainting his entire house that regulation beige during the worst month of chemotherapy because Delilah decided his original color was too bold. Retired teacher Patricia, who'd spent 40 years educating ungrateful brats, received violation notices for Christmas decorations in January. Decorations she'd already taken down, But Delilah enjoyed watching decent people scramble to prove their innocence. 3 families had already surrendered, spending thousands on unnecessary improvements just to make her harassment stop, feeding Delilah's addiction to other people's submission. But I'd spent 15 years engineering water systems, and I understood something this suburban dictator didn't. When you try to stop a natural force that's been flowing for 80 years, it doesn't just disappear. It finds another way through, usually taking the path of least resistance until it builds enough pressure to break whatever's blocking it. Delilah Thornberry had picked the wrong engineer to mess with, and she was about to learn that water always wins. Delilah wasted no time escalating from passive-aggressive letters to full-scale legal warfare. 2 weeks after our driveway confrontation, she called an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled during work hours when normal people couldn't attend, a trick I'd later learned she'd pulled from some HOA dictatorship playbook. The meeting was pure theater, with her 3 hand-picked cronies nodding like dashboard ornaments while she presented a PowerPoint claiming my creek was an environmental hazard that threatened property values and public health. The 4-1 vote to enforce immediate remediation was as rigged as a carnival game, with only Patricia dissenting because she still remembered what integrity looked like. Within 72 hours, I received a cease and desist letter from attorneys who probably charged more per hour than most people's monthly mortgage, claiming my creek violated city ordinances about uncontrolled water flow. Here's something most homeowners don't realize about HOA intimidation tactics. They'll reference city ordinances and municipal violations that either don't exist or don't apply to your situation, counting on you being too overwhelmed to fact-check their claims. When people call City Hall to verify these supposed violations, they get transferred between departments until they give up in frustration, assuming the bureaucratic runaround proves the violations are real. It's psychological warfare disguised as legal procedure, and it works because most folks don't have the time or energy to fight City Hall, even when City Hall isn't actually involved. But Delilah's biggest mistake was underestimating how much neighbors hate watching bullies win. When I organized a meeting at Grind and Barrett Coffee Shop, 23 people showed up on a Tuesday evening, and their stories made my blood boil hotter than the industrial-strength espresso. The aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls couldn't sweeten the bitter taste of learning how systematically Delilah had terrorized our community. Mrs. Morgan's voice trembled as she described destroying her grandmother's heirloom tomato plants, seeds carried from Vietnam 50 years ago and nurtured through every Colorado season since. Dale fought back tears, explaining how Delilah had threatened daily fines while his wife was too sick from chemotherapy to get out of bed, demanding he repaint their house during her 2-week recovery period. The pattern that emerged was pure protection racket psychology. Friends of Delilah received gentle warnings about potential violations, while anyone on her bad side got immediate fines and legal threats. Her selective enforcement was so blatant it bordered on comedy, except it was bankrupting decent people. Patricia had received violation notices for Christmas wreaths in January despite documented flu that left her bedridden, while Delilah's bestie Susan kept Halloween decorations up until March, without a peep from the HOA Gestapo. My engineering background kicked into high gear as I researched our legal position. The original 1998 HOA formation documents revealed something beautiful. My creek was specifically excluded from all covenants because it predated development by decades. Even better, the city planning department confirmed my creek violated 0 ordinances and actually had environmental protection status as part of the watershed management system. The State Water Rights Commission was downright encouraging. Grandpa Joe's 1952 claim represented senior rights that legally trumped any HOA authority, period. Armed with ironclad documentation and growing community support, I filed complaints with the State Water Rights Commission while local kids launched a Save Salamander Creek petition that collected 200 signatures from 3 school districts within a week. Even my ex-wife Sarah called offering legal research help, which should have been my first clue that public opinion was swinging hard against Delilah's suburban dictatorship. The woman had overplayed her hand so spectacularly that she'd united Republicans and Democrats, parents and retirees, longtime residents and newcomers in shared disgust at her tactics. Then came the twist that changed everything. Delilah's response to organized community resistance wasn't retreat or compromise, it was declaring total war. She started parking her white Escalade to block my driveway during peak hours, called my employer claiming I was creating workplace disruption with my legal troubles, and began what can only be described as a stalking campaign disguised as HOA enforcement. The woman had lost whatever thin veneer of legitimacy she'd maintained and gone full psycho, which meant the gloves were officially off. Delilah's war against my family creek escalated from petty harassment to career assassination when she called Morrison Environmental, claiming I was creating workplace disruption and suggesting my employer might want to reevaluate my fitness for client projects. The woman was literally trying to destroy my livelihood because I wouldn't surrender my grandfather's legacy to her suburban power trip. When that failed to break me, she filed a false complaint with the county health department, claiming my stagnant water bred disease-carrying mosquitoes that threatened public safety. The bitter irony was that her own decorative pond, the one with actual standing water and real mosquito problems, sat untested while she weaponized government agencies against a flowing mountain creek that had never caused a single health issue in 80 years. Delilah's biggest tactical error was dragging Tom Alvarez into her personal vendetta. When the county health inspector arrived expecting a mosquito-infested swamp, he found a pristine ecosystem where native trout spawned in crystal-clear pools, and kids played safely in ankle-deep water that sparkled like liquid diamonds in the afternoon sun. The sound of water babbling over smooth stones and the sight of salamanders darting between rocks made it obvious that Delilah's complaint was pure malicious fiction. Even better, Tom was a weekend fly fisherman who immediately recognized the rare Colorado cutthroat trout living in my creek, a state-protected species that made any attempt to fill or divert the waterway a potential environmental felony. Most people don't realize that filing false environmental complaints creates an official paper trail that can destroy you in court. Government inspectors keep detailed records of who wastes their time with fabricated emergencies, and they particularly hate being used as weapons in personal vendettas. Tom's official report didn't just clear my creek of health violations, it recommended including the habitat in the county's watershed protection program and noted the frivolous nature of the complaint that brought him there. The health department vindication triggered something beautiful. My professional network mobilized like an army of engineers defending one of their own. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a water quality expert I'd collaborated with on municipal projects, volunteered comprehensive testing that proved my creek water was cleaner than what flowed from most kitchen taps. The results showed zero harmful bacteria, perfect pH balance, and mineral content indicating an untouched mountain ecosystem that had remained pristine for generations. Word spread through industry conferences, turning Delilah into a cautionary tale about HOA overreach that resonated with professionals who understood water rights law. Meanwhile, Delilah hired private investigator Frank Brennan to excavate dirt from my personal life, apparently convinced that destroying my reputation would somehow legitimize her creek-filling fantasies. Frank, a retired cop who took pride in ethical work, spent 2 weeks investigating my background and came up completely empty for scandal. Instead, he discovered I volunteered with local school STEM programs, maintained a spotless professional reputation, and that my grandfather was a decorated World War II veteran who'd built the creek's stone bridge as a memorial to fallen comrades. The smell of Frank's cigarettes mixed with coffee during our meeting, where he delivered the bombshell. When he'd told Delilah no scandalous evidence existed, she'd explicitly asked him to interpret normal life events as character flaws, and suggested he might find creative ways to make me look unstable. That conversation changed everything. Frank's written statement documenting Delilah's attempt to suborn perjury gave my attorney Rebecca Santos ammunition for restraining orders and potential criminal charges. The woman had become so desperate to destroy me that she'd tried bribing a licensed investigator into committing fraud, crossing the line from harassment into felony territory. But her most catastrophic mistake was still coming. In her escalating desperation, Delilah began recruiting new neighbors with promises of reduced HOA fees in exchange for supporting her anti-creek crusade. She was so blinded by arrogance that she failed to research her targets, accidentally approaching Dr. Patricia Kendall, an environmental scientist who'd just moved in 2 blocks over. When Patricia heard Delilah's recruitment pitch about eliminating the problematic waterway, she didn't just decline to help. She offered to testify as an expert witness about the creek's ecological importance and the environmental crimes Delilah was contemplating. The amateur dictator had accidentally recruited her own star witness for the prosecution, and the metallic taste of victory was starting to mix with the fresh mountain air as I watched her carefully constructed campaign crumble under its own dishonesty. Delilah's response to organized community resistance was declaring total war with an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled with barely 24 hours notice, a flagrant violation of bylaws requiring 72 hours for non-emergency matters. The agenda item that made my blood run cold was a proposed $10,000 special assessment on my property for legal costs associated with environmental remediation, which was basically legalized extortion disguised as parliamentary procedure. Even more audacious, she threatened foreclosure proceedings for my repeated covenant violations, apparently believing that screaming nonsense in front of witnesses would somehow make it legally binding. The stench of her desperation was getting stronger than the diesel fumes from the concrete truck that appeared outside my house Friday evening while I was supposed to be safely away on a work trip to Denver. The concrete truck ambush revealed Delilah's complete descent into criminal behavior. Brantley Concrete Solutions arrived at twilight claiming authorization for emergency creek remediation without permits, environmental studies, or any legal authority whatsoever. The rumble of that diesel engine in my driveway sent ice through my veins. This psychopath was planning to fill my grandfather's creek with cement under cover of darkness, creating a destruction so complete it would take years and bankruptcy-level legal fees to reverse. The metallic tang of panic mixed with mountain air as I realized she'd moved beyond harassment into outright environmental terrorism. Fortunately, my neighbors had organized faster than Delilah could organize destruction, and 12 text messages warned me about the concrete crew before they'd finished unloading equipment. My emergency drive back from Denver at 80 miles per hour gave me time to coordinate the perfect counterattack. I speed-dialed Sheriff Deputy Rodriguez, my attorney Rebecca Santos, and the county environmental officer while my knuckles went white gripping the steering wheel. When I screeched into my driveway to find Delilah standing beside that concrete mixer like some suburban warlord screaming at the crew foreman about property rights and taking decisive action, I knew she'd finally crossed from harassment into felony territory. The crew chief, a weathered professional named Miguel, who'd been pouring concrete for 20 years, took one look at my water rights documentation and the deputy's badge before flatly refusing to proceed without proper permits. The smell of Miguel's cigarette smoke mixed with Delilah's panic sweat as she watched her surprise attack crumble faster than poorly mixed cement. But the real nuclear bomb exploded when Rebecca's financial audit uncovered systematic embezzlement disguised as legitimate HOA expenses. Delilah had approved a $15,000 landscape maintenance contract paid to Vernon's car dealership for work never performed on property that didn't exist. The community pool maintenance fund had been looted to finance her personal legal crusade, leaving actual infrastructure repairs unfunded while she pursued her vendetta against my creek. Most damning of all, she'd quietly approved covenant violations for her own unpermitted deck addition while simultaneously terrorizing neighbors for identical violations. The woman had been running the HOA like her personal piggy bank while playing judge, jury, and executioner with everyone else's property rights. From years of engineering municipal water systems, I'd learned that government agencies hate being used as weapons in personal vendettas, and bureaucrats who discover they've been manipulated tend to become very motivated to document the truth. When multiple agencies started comparing notes about Delilah's false complaints, a pattern emerged that transformed her from complainant to suspect in potential criminal fraud cases. The media explosion began when Channel 9 News requested an interview after my Facebook post about the concrete truck incident hit 50,000 views in 6 hours. Sitting under those blazing studio lights with the chemical smell of hairspray making me dizzy, I explained how one person's abuse of HOA authority could destroy entire communities unless decent people stood up with knowledge and documentation. The story spread to regional outlets and generated hundreds of comments from homeowners sharing similar horror stories about power-drunk officials who'd forgotten they served communities, not ruled them like personal kingdoms. Delilah's panic response was a scripted Facebook video filmed in her pristine living room that collected dislikes faster than a political scandal. She claimed victimhood in a coordinated harassment campaign by environmental extremists threatening property values and community standards. The comments section became a war zone where neighbors shared screenshots of her harassment, photos of the trespassing concrete truck, and documentation of financial mismanagement that made her look less like a victim and more like a wannabe dictator watching her empire collapse in real time. The taste of impending victory was mixing with crisp mountain air, like the promise of a cleansing storm that would wash away everything artificial and leave only what was genuine and enduring. The anonymous envelope that destroyed Delilah's entire world appeared under my door on a Tuesday morning like a gift from the gods of ironic justice. The thick, expensive paper felt heavy with secrets as I carried it inside with my coffee, and when I opened it, the photographs spilled across my kitchen table like evidence in a crime thriller. What I saw made my engineering brain explode with possibilities. Detailed shots of Delilah's basement renovation showing massive, unpermitted concrete work, illegal drainage modifications, and a sophisticated French drain system that had never seen a city inspector or received a single approval stamp. The technical picture hit me like a lightning bolt of pure vindication. Delilah's $45,000 man cave renovation hadn't just violated building codes, it had fundamentally hijacked the natural groundwater flow that had fed my family creek for 80 years. Her basement waterproofing included underground barriers and sump pump systems designed to keep Vernon's precious entertainment room bone dry by redirecting groundwater away from their property. But physics doesn't care about property lines or suburban vanity projects, and that displaced water had to go somewhere. By damming the underground flow that had sustained our creek through every drought since 1952, she'd reduced our water volume by 30%, while creating exactly the standing water and drainage problems she'd been blaming on me. The irony was so perfect it felt like cosmic payback. Every single accusation Delilah had hurled at my creek, standing water, mosquito breeding, property damage risks, was actually caused by her own illegal modifications to the natural drainage system. The anonymous photos included contractor receipts showing she'd paid Brantley Concrete Solutions during the city's permit review period, meaning construction had started before approval and continued without inspection. Even more damning, separate billing for environmental disposal contrasted sharply with photos showing concrete truck washout flowing directly into storm drains marked with federal EPA contamination warnings. When I cross-referenced the construction timeline with Grandpa Joe's 70 years of meticulous weather journals, the correlation was devastating. Our creek had maintained consistent flow through droughts, floods, and seasonal variations with the reliability of a Swiss watch, with my grandfather documenting water levels during major weather events like a man who understood that water meant survival. The decline in creek flow began exactly 6 weeks after Delilah's basement construction started, and her modifications had created an underground dam that starved my creek while flooding neighboring basements during heavy rains. Rebecca Santos practically glowed with predatory satisfaction when I spread the evidence across her conference table. Marcus, this isn't just building code violations. This is environmental crime with federal teeth. The Clean Water Act makes discharging construction pollutants into storm systems a felony carrying up to $50,000 in daily fines. And her unpermitted modifications require environmental impact studies costing more than most people's houses before the city will even consider retroactive permitting. The legal implications were staggering. EPA enforcement action, mandatory environmental remediation, personal liability for downstream property damage, and potential criminal charges for contaminating municipal water systems. Most homeowners never realize that major drainage modifications often require environmental permits that cost tens of thousands of dollars and take years to obtain, because altering natural water flow can affect entire watersheds and neighboring properties. Delilah had skipped this process entirely, creating liability that would follow her forever and insurance exclusions that left her financially naked when the consequences came due. But the most beautiful revelation was how completely this flipped our legal positions. Delilah had spent months claiming my creek threatened property values and safety, while her own criminal construction caused every problem she'd blamed on me. Her expensive basement now represented a massive liability that insurance wouldn't cover due to unpermitted work, and compliance would require partially demolishing Vernon's man cave to install proper drainage systems. The woman who tried to destroy my family legacy with lies and harassment had accidentally documented her own environmental crimes, giving every agency she'd weaponized against me jurisdiction to prosecute her for violations carrying serious criminal penalties. The power shift felt like watching gravity finally catch up with someone who'd been falling for months without realizing the ground was rushing up to meet them. The war council that would destroy Delilah's empire met at Flapjack Junction on a crisp Thursday morning, where the smell of sizzling bacon mixed with the intoxicating aroma of impending revenge. Rebecca Santos commandeered our corner booth like a general preparing for total victory, spreading legal documents across the sticky table while Dr. Amanda Rodriguez organized environmental data with surgical precision. Patricia's phone buzzed constantly with intelligence from neighbors who'd transformed from terrorized victims into a coordinated resistance network hungry for justice. The sound of coffee cups clinking and papers rustling created a symphony of preparation that made my engineer's heart sing with anticipation. Marcus, we're not just fighting back. We're going nuclear, Rebecca announced, her eyes gleaming with prosecutorial bloodlust. Comprehensive countersuit for harassment and emotional distress, environmental crime reports to state agencies, and a financial audit that'll expose every dollar she's stolen from the community. The beautiful irony is that every government office she tried to weaponize against you now has jurisdiction to prosecute her for actual felonies. Her strategy combined civil litigation with criminal referrals in a legal pincer movement that would crush Delilah from multiple directions simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez had spent weeks turning our creek into an environmental lawyer's wet dream, documenting protected species and ecological functions that made Delilah's cement-filling fantasies look like environmental terrorism. Your creek doesn't just support rare Colorado cutthroat trout, it filters agricultural runoff from 3 upstream properties, preventing nitrogen contamination of municipal water supplies. Her illegal drainage modifications have compromised watershed protection for the entire valley. The environmental impact study required for retroactive permitting would cost $50,000 and take 2 years, assuming state agencies didn't simply deny permits for damaging protected habitat. Patricia had weaponized her 40 years of classroom management experience into organizing the most effective neighborhood resistance movement I'd ever seen. Phone trees, social media coordination, rapid response protocols for HOA intimidation. She'd turned our subdivision into a political machine focused on one goal: ending Delilah's dictatorship permanently. We've documented systematic harassment against 14 families, financial crimes totaling nearly $90,000, and procedural violations that invalidate 2 years of board decisions. More importantly, we have witnesses ready to testify about the psychological and financial damage her reign of terror has inflicted on our community. The media momentum had exploded beyond local news into a viral symbol of grassroots resistance against institutional bullying. Channel 9's investigative series on HOA abuse across Colorado featured our creek as the environmental David-fighting suburban Goliath, with footage of children catching salamanders contrasted against Delilah's concrete truck invasion. Environmental groups nationwide shared our story, turning neighborhood drama into a case study of how ordinary citizens can defeat corrupt authority through documentation and persistence. The taste of viral victory was sweeter than Patricia's homemade cinnamon rolls cooling on the diner counter. From my years engineering municipal water systems, I'd learned that bullies who abuse legal process usually break multiple laws simultaneously, counting on victims being too intimidated or financially exhausted to connect the dots. In Colorado, our anti-SLAPP laws protect citizens from lawsuits designed to silence legitimate complaints about public issues, and they include attorney fee recovery that makes frivolous litigation devastatingly expensive for aggressors who lose. The financial investigation had uncovered corruption that would make a mob accountant blush. Beyond paying Vernon's dealership $15,000 for imaginary landscaping, Delilah had approved her own covenant violations, spent community funds on personal legal fees, and concealed conflicts of interest that violated every principle of fiduciary responsibility. 3 board members were quietly consulting lawyers about personal liability exposure, and several neighbors demanded refunds of assessments used for unauthorized litigation. My documentation project had evolved into a multimedia archive spanning 4 generations of creek stewardship. Time-lapse videos showing seasonal wildlife, professional surveys confirming water rights boundaries, and historical photos from Grandpa Joe's collection proving 80 years of consistent flow and community benefit. The visual evidence would devastate any jury, contrasting natural beauty and protected habitat against concrete mixer terrorism and environmental destruction captured on security cameras. But the most satisfying element was watching Delilah's psychological collapse accelerate as pressure mounted from multiple directions. While we'd been quietly building an airtight case with professional documentation and legal precision, she'd been spiraling into increasingly desperate and criminal behavior that created fresh evidence of her complete unfitness for leadership. Her own actions were destroying her credibility faster than any opposition research could, and the upcoming public confrontation would give our community front-row seats to witness the spectacular implosion of a tyrant who'd forgotten that power without legitimacy is just expensive bullying with fancy letterhead. Delilah's final descent into criminal insanity began with midnight trespassing that made my blood run cold when I reviewed security footage the next morning. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when she and some hired accomplice crept through my backyard like suburban burglars, armed with professional cameras and soil sampling equipment that suggested something far more sinister than another frivolous lawsuit. The grainy footage showed her designer boots squelching through creek mud as she photographed water flow from multiple angles, filling mason jars with soil samples while frantically scribbling measurements in a notebook. The metallic taste of violation mixed with rage as I watched this psychopath desecrate my family's sanctuary under cover of darkness, apparently believing that trespassing evidence would somehow legitimize her war against my grandfather's legacy. Sheriff Deputy Martinez caught them red-handed when I called in the break-in, his flashlight beam illuminating Delilah's mascara-streaked face like a raccoon trapped in garbage. Her accomplice, some environmental consultant she'd hired to manufacture fake hazard assessments, fled into the woods when he spotted the patrol car, leaving Delilah to explain why she was conducting unauthorized soil sampling at midnight with equipment that belonged in a crime lab, not a suburban backyard. The sight of her trembling hands clutching those mason jars while Deputy Martinez documented evidence of criminal trespassing was almost pitiful enough to generate sympathy, until I remembered she'd spent months trying to destroy everything my grandfather had built with lies and legal terrorism. But Delilah's most catastrophic error came when desperation drove her to attempt bribing Mountain Structural Solutions owner Jake Morrison into providing fraudulent testimony about foundation risks. Jake, a third-generation contractor who'd built his reputation on ethical work, secretly recorded the entire conversation where Delilah offered $5,000 cash for a report claiming creek erosion threatened neighboring homes' structural integrity. The smell of her panic sweat mixed with expensive perfume as she explained how a manufactured structural emergency would justify immediate creek filling before environmental agencies could intervene to protect the habitat. "All you have to do is interpret normal soil conditions as potentially dangerous," Delilah instructed Jake, her voice pitched higher with desperation. "Emphasize immediate action requirements to prevent catastrophic foundation damage. I'll handle the legal aspects once we have professional documentation supporting emergency remediation." When Jake refused and threatened to report the attempted bribery, her suburban mask slipped completely as she screamed about environmental terrorists and property value destruction, before storming out like a toddler whose candy had been confiscated by responsible adults. Jake's ethical backbone proved stronger than Delilah's corruption, and his written statement documenting her solicitation of perjury gave Rebecca ammunition for criminal conspiracy charges that would follow Delilah long after our civil litigation ended. The recording captured explicit instructions to commit fraud, create false emergency justifications, and circumvent environmental protections through manufactured evidence. In my years working with municipal contractors, I'd learned that attempted bribery of licensed professionals carries serious consequences because it undermines the entire system of building safety and environmental protection that keeps communities safe from exactly the kind of disasters Delilah's illegal modifications had created. Community surveillance networks had evolved beyond neighbor communication into sophisticated documentation of Delilah's increasingly erratic behavior patterns. Mrs. Morgan witnessed her photographing other properties without permission, apparently expanding harassment campaigns to anyone who'd supported creek protection. Dale recorded audio of intimidation attempts against elderly neighbors, threatening property assessments and legal action if they didn't sign anti-creek petitions. Patricia documented systematic HOA procedural violations as Delilah abandoned democratic governance in favor of unilateral edicts issued like some suburban dictator whose grip on power dissolved with every desperate action. The incident that sealed her criminal fate occurred when Delilah called city emergency services claiming my creek had caused catastrophic basement flooding, requiring immediate municipal intervention. City engineers responding to the supposed emergency instead found flooding caused entirely by her own unpermitted drainage modifications, with zero connection to natural creek flow patterns that had functioned perfectly for 80 years. The official incident report didn't just debunk her emergency claims. It documented a pattern of filing false reports with government agencies that constituted criminal abuse of emergency services and fraudulent use of municipal resources. Building department pressure reached critical mass when formal violation notices established a 30-day deadline for obtaining retroactive permits or facing escalating daily fines that would compound faster than credit card interest. Her required environmental impact study carried a minimum $40,000 price tag and 18-month timeline, during which basement flooding would worsen with every Colorado storm season. Insurance companies had denied coverage for unpermitted work damage, leaving her financially naked as consequences accelerated beyond her ability to control or contain through legal manipulation. Delilah's final gambit revealed itself Friday evening when the rumble of concrete mixer trucks positioning near my creek access point announced her intention to commit the most brazen environmental crime in Colorado HOA history. The plan was breathtakingly criminal. Fill my family creek with cement during my scheduled weekend work trip to Denver, creating irreversible ecological destruction that would cost hundreds of thousands to challenge through environmental courts. She'd recruited Vernon's dealership employees as volunteer labor, apparently believing that calling felony conspiracy a community service project would somehow legitimize 80 years of natural heritage being murdered by suburban concrete. The Friday night invasion felt like watching environmental terrorists disguise themselves as neighborhood volunteers. Diesel engines rumbled through our peaceful valley like mechanical predators, concrete hoses snaking toward my creek like industrial serpents preparing to strangle everything beautiful about our mountain sanctuary. Text messages from vigilant neighbors flooded my phone documenting equipment placement, worker assignments, and Delilah's increasingly manic coordination of what amounted to ecological assassination disguised as HOA enforcement. The metallic taste of pure rage mixed with mountain air as I realized this psychopath was actually planning to concrete over my grandfather's memorial while I was supposedly safely away in Denver. My counter-operation required canceling travel plans and orchestrating the most comprehensive response to environmental crime our county had ever witnessed. Simultaneous calls to Sheriff Deputy Martinez, EPA Officer Dr. Patricia Kendall, and Channel 9 News created a multi-agency response that would transform Delilah's planned destruction into the most documented HOA crime spree in state history. The sound of camera shutters and radio chatter mixed with diesel engine rumbles as our quiet subdivision transformed into a battleground between natural heritage and suburban vandalism. Saturday morning's confrontation began when concrete trucks roared to life at dawn like mechanical monsters awakening to feed on pristine habitat. Delilah arrived in her most expensive business suit, apparently believing designer armor would legitimize federal environmental crimes committed in broad daylight before dozens of witnesses. The crew foreman Miguel, a weathered professional who'd poured concrete for 2 decades, examined my water rights documentation and flatly refused to proceed. "Lady, this is protected watershed with senior rights from 1952. You want federal felonies, get federal permits because I'm not sacrificing my contractor's license for your neighborhood psychodrama." The legal cavalry arrived like something from a Western movie, with Deputy Martinez serving cease and desist orders, while Dr. Kendall threatened immediate criminal prosecution under Clean Water Act provisions that carry $25,000 daily fines for filling protected waterways without environmental permits. City Inspector Thompson confirmed that creek modifications required approvals from county, state, and federal agencies that Delilah had never contacted, much less convinced to authorize ecological destruction. The concrete crew evacuated faster than carnival workers fleeing tornadoes, demanding immediate payment for canceled services while Delilah's face cycled through color changes that would have impressed chameleon researchers. But the twist that destroyed Delilah's last shred of credibility came when Vernon himself appeared at the confrontation to publicly denounce his wife's environmental terrorism. Standing before 30 neighbors, news cameras, and law enforcement, he announced that Delilah had hidden $60,000 in legal fees and violation fines that threatened their family's financial survival. "My wife has lost perspective about what's important," he declared, his voice shaking with shame and anger. "This creek has been part of our community for 80 years, and destroying it won't solve the problems she created with illegal construction." The sight of her own husband abandoning ship sent Delilah into a meltdown that made her previous tantrums look restrained. Delilah's public breakdown provided entertainment that transformed our subdivision into an amphitheater of justice. Screaming at law enforcement about government conspiracy while threatening to sue God himself, she accused everyone from the sheriff to the EPA of being part of my environmental terrorist network. Her performance was captured by smartphones and news cameras as she transitioned from suburban dictator to clinical case study, her expensive suit wilting under Colorado sun while she ranted about constitutional rights she'd systematically violated and legal authority she'd criminally abused for months. Community celebration erupted as neighbors realized they were witnessing the end of tyranny that had terrorized families for over a year. Children held Save Our Creek signs made in art class while parents live-streamed the meltdown to social media platforms that amplified local justice into viral victory. Environmental groups shared footage of citizens defeating institutional corruption through documentation and persistence, turning our creek into a symbol of grassroots environmental protection that inspired similar resistance movements across Colorado's HOA-dominated suburbs. Major construction projects near waterways require environmental impact studies costing tens of thousands of dollars specifically because altering natural water flow can damage entire ecosystems and neighboring properties for generations. Delilah's attempt to skip this process would have triggered enforcement from multiple agencies simultaneously, creating criminal liability that insurance wouldn't cover and legal consequences that follow property owners forever. The financial devastation accelerated beyond Delilah's ability to control as concrete cancellation fees, accumulating violation fines, and mounting legal costs created a perfect storm of bankruptcy-level expenses. Her basement flooding worsened with every rainstorm, highlighting how illegal drainage modifications caused exactly the water problems she'd blamed on natural creek flow. Vernon's public defection marked the moment their marriage began dissolving under pressure from his wife's criminal obsession with destroying our neighborhood's most beautiful natural feature for reasons nobody could understand or justify. The emergency HOA meeting that would destroy Delilah's empire packed Millfield Springs Community Center beyond fire code capacity, with 160 residents cramming into a space designed for 50 people who'd been terrorized into silence for too long. The electric smell of nervous anticipation mixed with the sweet aroma of impending justice as neighbors who'd suffered months of harassment finally gathered to witness democracy in action. Channel 9 News broadcast live coverage, while 3 newspaper reporters documented proceedings that would determine whether communities could reclaim legitimate governance from suburban dictators drunk on manufactured authority. County Commissioner Janet Rodriguez attended as official observer due to statewide media attention our creek had generated, while Sheriff Deputy Martinez positioned himself strategically to maintain order during what everyone sensed would be explosive confrontation. The buzz of whispered conversations and clicking camera shutters created an atmosphere so charged you could practically taste the electricity of people who'd been pushed around, finally getting their chance to push back through legitimate democratic process. Delilah's entrance 20 minutes late was pure theater, full business attire designed to project authority she no longer possessed, but the effect resembled a deposed monarch arriving at her own trial. She immediately demanded closed executive session to exclude media and residents from witnessing her final desperate maneuvers, but the motion died without a second, as even her formerly loyal board members abandoned the sinking ship of her credibility. The sight of her standing isolated at that podium, surrounded by hostile faces she'd systematically alienated, was almost tragic until you remembered the families she'd bankrupted and terrorized with legal harassment. The financial nuclear bomb exploded when Treasurer Patricia revealed that Delilah's personal vendetta against my creek had consumed $87,000 in community funds, completely bankrupting the HOA while enriching attorneys who'd encouraged her increasingly criminal behavior. This board was never authorized to wage legal warfare against residents using community money, Patricia announced with the moral authority of someone who'd taught civics for 40 years. Mrs. Thornberry has committed embezzlement disguised as community service, and every family here is now facing special assessments to repair the financial damage her obsession has caused. My presentation felt like delivering a murder trial closing argument to a jury that had witnessed the crime firsthand. Professional slides documenting harassment timeline, grandfather's 1952 water rights proving legal precedents, environmental protection evidence, and city violation confirmations created visual testimony that made Delilah's criminality undeniable. The contrast between pristine natural habitat supporting protected species and concrete truck terrorism was so stark that several elderly residents audibly gasped at security footage showing environmental assault attempts. Community testimony transformed the meeting into a truth commission, where victims finally confronted their tormentor in public forum. Mrs. Morgan's trembling voice described destroying grandmother's heirloom plants under Delilah's threats, while Dale fought tears explaining house painting forced during his wife's chemotherapy. 15 residents shared stories of financial harassment, selective enforcement, and psychological intimidation that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse disguised as neighborhood improvement. The accumulated testimony made it clear that attacking my creek was just the most visible example of tyranny that had infected our entire community. But the moment that ended Delilah's reign forever came when Rebecca Santos approached the microphone carrying an envelope that would change everything. The room fell silent as she opened official letterhead and began reading. The Colorado Attorney General's office has filed criminal charges against Delilah Thornberry for environmental crimes, insurance fraud, embezzlement of community funds, and conspiracy to commit perjury. The words hit like thunder in absolute silence before exploding into cheers that shook the building's foundations. Federal EPA investigators have recommended prosecution under Clean Water Act provisions, carrying up to 5 years imprisonment and $200,000 in fines. Rebecca continued as Delilah's face went white as fresh concrete. Additionally, the IRS has opened investigations into unreported income from fraudulent HOA contracts, and the State Insurance Commission is pursuing felony charges for filing false claims related to unpermitted construction damage. Delilah's meltdown was spectacular enough to become YouTube legend. Screaming about government conspiracy and environmental terrorism, she accused everyone from the sheriff to the EPA of being part of my criminal network while threatening lawsuits against every person in this room. Her performance was captured by multiple cameras as she transitioned from suburban dictator to unhinged criminal defendant, her expensive suit wilting under pavilion lights while she ranted about constitutional rights she'd systematically violated for months. The crowd's response was pure cathartic release. Spontaneous applause, cheering, and celebration that echoed across our subdivision like liberation from occupying forces. Children waved "Save Our Creek" signs, while parents live-streamed the meltdown to social media platforms that would make our victory viral inspiration for communities nationwide. When Fire Marshal Wilson moved proceedings outside due to overcrowding, the celebration atmosphere resembled a block party where the neighborhood bully had finally been exposed and defeated. Vernon's public betrayal provided the final twist that completed Delilah's destruction. Taking the microphone while his wife shrieked in background, he announced their immediate divorce proceedings and his cooperation with criminal investigations. "My wife has become someone I don't recognize," he declared to stunned silence. "Her obsession with destroying this beautiful creek has cost our family everything, and I won't let her drag me down with her criminal behavior." The sight of her own husband abandoning ship sent Delilah into hysterics that required medical attention as paramedics arrived to treat what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown. The final vote removing Delilah from all HOA positions passed unanimously while she ranted from a stretcher about conspiracy and betrayal, creating footage that environmental groups would use for years as examples of how organized communities can defeat institutional corruption through persistence and documentation. The silence that followed Delilah's removal from power felt like stepping into fresh mountain air after months of breathing toxic fumes, with our community finally free to heal from 8 months of legal terrorism that had turned neighbors into enemies and democracy into dictatorship. New HOA leadership emerged through the most transparent election process our subdivision had ever experienced, replacing Delilah's rubber-stamp cronies with neighbors who understood that boards serve communities rather than ruling them like personal kingdoms. All legal action against my creek was dismissed with prejudice, meaning no future HOA could ever again weaponize municipal authority against my family's 80-year water rights. The $30,000 settlement for harassment damages mattered less than official acknowledgement that her entire campaign had been criminal abuse of power disguised as community service. Delilah's consequences arrived with the inevitability of Colorado avalanches, as criminal convictions for environmental violations, embezzlement, and insurance fraud created legal problems that would follow her permanently. $68,000 in EPA fines and mandatory remediation costs for unpermitted construction bankrupted her completely, forcing sale of their McMansion for $140,000 below market value due to environmental liens that scared away legitimate buyers. Personal bankruptcy within 4 months marked the spectacular collapse of someone who'd tried to destroy my grandfather's legacy and ended up obliterating her own life through criminal obsession with power she'd never legitimately earned. The creek restoration project, funded by Vernon's guilt money, transformed our waterway into a regional showcase of environmental rehabilitation that exceeded even Grandpa Joe's wildest conservation dreams. University of Colorado ecology students adopted the habitat for ongoing research documenting species recovery and water quality improvements that attracted environmental groups from across the Rocky Mountain region. Native plant restoration enhanced natural beauty while creating wildlife corridors that brought back species unseen in our valley for decades, including a family of river otters that became local celebrities among visiting school groups and nature photographers. But the most meaningful transformation was personal, as fighting to save my family's creek had reconnected me with environmental advocacy I'd abandoned during years of corporate consulting. Emma and Jake evolved into passionate young conservationists who could identify every species in our habitat and explain water rights law with the confidence of children who'd watched their father defend something sacred and win against impossible odds. Our weekend creek walks became teaching moments about ecosystem management, community responsibility, and the importance of standing up to bullies who abuse institutional power to hurt innocent people. The Grandpa Joe Memorial Conservation Center was established in the restored Creek Valley with donations from environmental groups, neighboring communities, and families inspired by our victory over suburban tyranny. The Education Center hosts school programs teaching watershed protection, sponsors research projects documenting climate change impacts on mountain ecosystems, and provides meeting space for environmental advocacy groups organizing similar resistance movements across Colorado. Emma's acceptance to Colorado State University's environmental engineering program with full scholarship funding marked the continuation of our family's dedication to protecting water resources for future generations who deserve clean streams and functioning ecosystems. 3 years later, our story had inspired legislative changes to Colorado HOA oversight laws that require environmental impact review before boards can challenge pre-existing natural features, while documentary coverage introduced our creek to national audiences as a symbol of grassroots environmental protection. My speaking engagements at conferences and universities focused on practical strategies for fighting institutional bullying while protecting community resources that belong to everyone, not just property developers and power-hungry officials who view nature as obstacles to sterile suburban conformity. The annual Creek Festival draws thousands of visitors who celebrate both environmental conservation and democratic governance, with activities ranging from salamander counting and water quality testing to workshops on citizen advocacy and community organizing. Local businesses sponsor educational booths while children participate in environmental art projects that decorate the memorial bridge my grandfather built as tribute to fallen comrades who died protecting freedom from exactly the kind of authoritarianism Delilah had tried to impose on our peaceful community. From an engineering perspective, I'd learned that protecting natural heritage requires understanding both technical aspects of environmental law and political dynamics of community organizing. But the most important lesson was that ordinary citizens can defeat institutional corruption when they document everything, build coalitions, and persist through intimidation designed to exhaust legitimate opposition. Natural features often have legal protections that supersede local authority, but homeowners must research their rights and fight for them because developers and autocrats will always choose short-term power over long-term environmental health. Every morning when I walk along the creek banks with steaming coffee and crisp mountain air, listening to water babble over stones my grandfather placed by hand 70 years ago, I hear his voice reminding me that some battles are worth fighting because they protect what belongs to generations not yet born. The memorial bridge where Emma and Jake now bring their friends has become a gathering place where families teach children about conservation, community responsibility, and the courage required to stand up for what's right when powerful people try to destroy what's beautiful. What's your worst HOA nightmare? Drop a comment sharing your story. It might inspire the next episode of HOA Stories where ordinary neighbors fight back against suburban tyranny and win. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more David versus Goliath victories proving that communities can defeat institutional corruption when they organize, document, and never surrender what matters most.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and Neighborhood Showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.